For most people in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, life was split neatly between those who had everything and those who didn't stand a chance. Amara Jenkins belonged to the latter group, a 19-year-old black girl who had spent most of her life drifting through the state's foster care system, bouncing from one temporary home to another like a ghost nobody wanted to keep. She was smart, street-savvy, and stubborn. But none of that mattered when you were broke, alone, and invisible. At the end of a long summer, Amara found herself sleeping on the back steps of a greasy spoon diner just off Route 61. She had just lost her job as a waitress, fired for snapping back at a drunk customer who slapped her behind. That night, she had no one to call, no money in her pocket, and no place to go. But fate has a strange sense of humor. That same night, a man named Leonard Whitmore pulled up to the diner in a dark green vintage Cadillac. Locals called him the Oil Ghost. A 72-year-old retired oil tycoon, Leonard was the type of man who used to own half the block, but hadn't been seen around town much since his wife died 5 years earlier. He had white hair, sharp blue eyes, and walked with a slow, deliberate limp, a leftover injury from a pipeline accident decades ago. Leonard noticed the girl curled up near the dumpster. Most people would have looked away, but he paused. He stepped out of the car, leaned on his cane, and asked, "You all right, miss?" Amara looked up with the cold, guarded stare of someone who had heard every kind of lie a man could tell. "No," she answered plainly, "but that's none of your business." Instead of leaving, Leonard sat down on the stoop beside her. He didn't push, didn't prod. He just talked, told her about how he used to come to this diner every Sunday with his wife, how the banana cream pie used to be the best in the county. He didn't ask her name. He didn't offer pity. He offered her a ride and a warm meal. She said no. He left a $100 bill beside her and walked away. The next day, she was back in the diner, ordering a slice of that same banana cream pie and nursing a cup of coffee like it was gold. And there he was again, sitting in his usual booth, reading the newspaper like nothing had happened. "You came back," he said without looking up. "You left me $100, she replied. "That pie's on you." From that moment on, something strange began. Leonard offered her a job, said he had a guest house on his property that needed cleaning, some flower beds that needed tending. Nothing inappropriate. He paid her in cash, always in envelopes, always on time. Amara moved into the guest house. She didn't ask questions. Neither did he. They were an odd pair. She was young, sharp-tongued, full of fight. He was old, soft-spoken, full of stories. But somehow they met in the middle. She read him poetry on quiet afternoons. He showed her how to cook Creole gumbo from scratch. She taught him how to use an iPhone. He taught her how to play chess. And slowly, what started as a truce turned into something neither of them could explain. He told her about his past, how he made his fortune overseas, how he lost his only brother in Vietnam, how he spent the last 10 years of his life feeling like a shadow of himself after his wife passed. She told him about the homes that didn't want her, about the men who tried to touch her, about the cold birthdays where no one called. And then, one night in early spring, he gave her a gift. It was a small box. Inside, a delicate gold ring with an emerald stone, the kind that looked old enough to belong in a museum. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "I want you to have it." She blinked, confused. "Why?" "Because," he said, "you're the first person who's made this house feel like home in a long time." A week later, he asked her to marry him. Amara thought he was joking. "You're 72, she said. "And you're 19, he answered. "But you've lived more life than most people twice my age." He wasn't rich in the way young men flashed on Instagram. He didn't take her on yacht trips or buy her designer bags. What he gave her was stability, safety, and something she'd never had before, unconditional love. So she said yes. The wedding was small. Just them, a pastor, and 2 of Leonard's old poker buddies. She wore a simple white dress from a secondhand shop. He wore the same suit he got married in 50 years ago. They danced in the garden under the string lights, drank sweet tea, and kissed like time didn't matter. But Baton Rouge has a long memory and a short temper when it comes to things it doesn't understand. Whispers started immediately. Gold digger. Dirty old man. She's after his money. He's lost his damn mind. The town didn't see love. They saw scandal. And as one neighbor put it, that girl's gonna kill him, just wait. They had no idea how close to the truth that would one day be. If you asked Amara what the happiest time in her life was, she'd say those first few months after the wedding. No one had ever looked at her the way Leonard did. Not like a prize, not like a burden, just as a person, as someone who mattered. Their morning started slow. Coffee on the porch, birdsong in the trees, and Leonard always reading the newspaper aloud with exaggerated flair, pretending to be a news anchor. She'd roll her eyes, but secretly she loved it. In the afternoons, Amara helped in the garden, painting flower pots, and tried her hand at growing tomatoes. Leonard would bring her lemonade and stories, always stories, about oil rigs in Venezuela, about poker games in New Orleans, about the wife he lost to cancer and the years of silence that followed. Some nights, they'd dance in the living room to Sam Cooke. Other nights, they'd fall asleep watching old movies, him snoring softly, her curled against his chest. But outside their little world, the whispers kept growing louder. People at the grocery store stared. A few of Leonard's old friends stopped calling. Even the pastor who'd married them avoided their calls. Some neighbors weren't subtle about their judgment. One morning, someone spray-painted "Gold Digger" on the brick wall by their mailbox. Leonard scrubbed it off himself. Amara told him she was used to it. The stares, the judgment, the assumptions. She'd been getting them her whole life. But Leonard wasn't. "I've never cared what people think," he told her one evening, his voice tight. "But now they're coming after you. That's different." Amara tried to shrug it off. "Let them talk. We've got this house. We've got peace." And for a while, they did. They stayed off social media. They kept to themselves. Leonard turned the guest house into a little art studio for Amara, where she painted in the afternoons. Her favorites were abstract, big swirls of color that looked like emotions melted into canvas. She was learning to live, but shadows have a way of creeping in, even in the warmest light. In early spring, Leonard's energy began to fade. He complained of fatigue, shortness of breath, dizzy spells. Amara begged him to see a doctor. He brushed it off as old age. Then came the fall. He collapsed in the garden one afternoon, hitting his head on the stone path. Amara screamed so loud the neighbor across the field came running. At the hospital, the doctors ran tests. They found signs of arrhythmia, early-stage heart failure. The lead doctor pulled Amara aside, gently. "He's stable for now, but he's fragile. Any added stress, any wrong medication could be dangerous." She nodded numb. "Just tell me what to do." From then on, Amara became his full-time caregiver. She managed his medications, monitored his meals, scheduled checkups. She read medical books. She stopped painting. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't romantic, but it was love. They still had their moments. Leonard teasing her about her cooking. Amara tucking a daisy behind his ear when he napped in the sun. But a heaviness hung in the air now, as if time itself was winding down. And then, one day, something shifted. Leonard sat her down on the back porch and said, "I want to change my will." Amara froze. "I want to make sure you're taken care of. If anything happens to me, this house, the savings, the trust, it's all yours." She didn't speak for a full minute. "I didn't marry you for money," she finally said. "I know that," he replied. "That's why I'm doing it." The very next week, he met with his lawyer. The papers were signed, but hadn't yet been filed with the court. And that's when the calls started. Blocked numbers, hushed voices, people asking about Leonard's health, about Amara. At first, She thought it was just nosy neighbors. But then one call stood out. A man's voice. Cold. Sharp. You think you've won, little girl? That old man promised that money to someone long before you showed up. She hung up, shaken. She didn't tell Leonard. She didn't want to worry him. But she started locking the doors at night. She noticed a black sedan parked near the edge of their property more than once. One morning, their mailbox had been smashed in. Still, Leonard insisted they ignore it. Let them talk, he said, echoing her old words. Let them watch. We've got each other. But one night, Leonard had trouble breathing. Amara rushed to his side, trying to calm him, trying to find his inhaler. But it wasn't where she left it. She panicked. By the time the ambulance arrived, his pulse was faint. He was rushed to the hospital, intubated, placed under observation. The doctor told her he's in critical condition, but we don't know what caused the episode. It wasn't consistent with heart failure. It's like his system was sabotaged. That word hit her like a bullet. Sabotaged? She returned home, tore through the medicine cabinet. Her heart pounded. Some bottles were missing. Some had been replaced. And suddenly, Amara realized this wasn't just bad luck or old age. Someone was trying to kill Leonard. The night Leonard died, the rain came down in sheets. Thick, relentless, drumming against the windows like an omen no one could ignore. Amara had barely slept for days. She'd been keeping watch over him like a hawk, measuring every breath, every cough, checking his pills, his meals, his water intake. But even the most vigilant caregiver has to blink. Just past 3 a.m., she dozed off in the armchair by his bedside. She woke up to silence. Too much silence. Leonard wasn't breathing. She screamed his name, shook him. No response. His lips were blue, his eyes half open, glassy. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. But by then, Leonard Whitmore was gone. Cardiac arrest, they said. Amara collapsed on the kitchen floor, curled up like a child. She didn't cry. There were no tears left, just a deep, hollow ache, like the world had emptied itself inside her. But grief has no room to breathe when suspicion is quick to follow. Within hours, the police arrived at the house. The lead detective was a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Carla Briggs, polite but clinical. She asked routine questions, but Amara felt the weight behind each one. When was the last time Mr. Whitmore saw a physician? Were you the only one with him in the house? Do you administer his medication? Do you know if he had a will? Amara answered honestly, her voice flat. Yes, he'd seen the doctor a week ago. Yes, she was the only one at home. Yes, she gave him his pills. And yes, he had just changed his will to leave everything to her. That answer changed everything. By noon, the whispers had grown into accusations. Reporters camped outside the house like vultures. News headlines screamed, 19-year-old widow inherits millions after husband's sudden death. Gold digger or killer? Too young, too rich, too fast. Even people who'd never met Amara suddenly had opinions. Her inbox flooded with threats. Strangers on the internet called her a predator, a con artist, a murderer. They dug up photos of the wedding, mocked her dress, her hair, her smile. They picked her apart like she was never human to begin with. But the worst blow came 2 days later, when a toxicology report arrived. The medical examiner found elevated traces of digoxin in Leonard's bloodstream, a medication used to treat heart conditions, yes, but lethal in high doses. They labeled it suspicious. The next morning, Amara was arrested for suspicion of second-degree murder. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just asked one question. Can I see him? One last time. They said no. At the station, she sat in a cold room under harsh fluorescent lights while a public defender, young, twitchy, and clearly overwhelmed, rambled about options and bail and charges that could carry up to 40 years to life. But I didn't kill him, she whispered. Then who did, he asked. She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But someone else did. 3 states away, in a quiet motel room just outside of Shreveport, Louisiana, a man named Terrence Brooks watched the news with a smirk on his face. He looked to be in his mid-40s, white, lean build, thin lips twisted in satisfaction. In his hand, he held a copy of Leonard Whitmore's previous will, the one that named Terrence as the sole beneficiary to the estate. What most people didn't know was that Terrence had long claimed to be Leonard's illegitimate son. His mother, a former secretary at one of Leonard's oil firms, had sworn that Leonard fathered him during a brief affair in 1978. Leonard never acknowledged him, but Terrence didn't forget. He spent decades watching from the sidelines, studying his father, tracking his wealth, waiting for the right moment. And when Leonard married a teenage girl, someone younger than Terrence's own daughter, he saw his opening. Terrence drove to Baton Rouge weeks before Leonard's death. He never knocked on the front door. He never showed his face, but he managed to sneak into the estate one night through an unlocked side gate. He knew the layout of the house, knew where the medicine cabinet was, knew exactly what to switch. It wasn't hard. All it took was swapping a few pills, upping a dosage, replacing labels, and walking away like nothing happened. Now, watching Amara on TV in an orange jumpsuit, Terrence whispered, "That's the price of being naive, sweetheart." But Terrence made one mistake. He didn't realize someone else was watching, too. In a small veteran's home across town, Samuel Harlan, a decorated Vietnam veteran and Leonard's oldest friend, stared at the same news broadcast. His hands trembled, not from age, but from rage. He had known Leonard for nearly 50 years. He'd seen Leonard in war, in love, in loss. He knew when the man was happy, and he had never seen Leonard happier than when he was with that girl. She didn't kill him. Samuel could feel it in his bones. And so, with aching knees and eyes clouded by age, Samuel stood up. He grabbed the cane Leonard once gave him, and he muttered, "Time to clean up the mess." The courtroom was packed, press on one side, townsfolk on the other, and in the middle sat Amara, shackled in orange, her face pale but calm. It had been 2 weeks since Leonard's death. 2 weeks of prison food, fluorescent lights, and whispered threats from other inmates who thought she was either a millionaire or a murderer, or both. Her public defender shuffled papers beside her, clearly in over his head. The prosecution? Laser-focused, confident. They had motive. They had opportunity. And most importantly, they had a new star witness. Terrence Brooks. He sat on the stand wearing a conservative gray suit and a practiced look of grief. "My name is Terrence Brooks," he told the court. "I'm Leonard Whitmore's biological son." Gasps in the gallery. Reporters scribbled faster. Even the judge looked surprised. "He never publicly acknowledged me," Terrence continued. "But we've been in contact over the years. I have letters, DNA results, and I was supposed to be the rightful heir." He wiped away a tear that didn't seem real. "I came to see him a week before he died. We talked about reconciling, about updating the will together. But that never happened. Instead, this girl manipulated him, poisoned him, stole his legacy." Amara didn't move, but her heart pounded like thunder. She had never met this man, not once. And yet here he was, rewriting history in real time. The prosecution painted a picture so vivid the jury could almost taste it. A young girl with nothing, seducing a lonely old man, marrying into millions, and eliminating him before the ink on the will dried. It was a story built to be believed, but it wasn't the truth. Across town, Samuel Harlan was on a mission. He had no badge, no credentials, just a walking cane, a worn-out Vietnam vet ID, and a lifetime of knowing when something smelled wrong. Leonard had once saved his life in the jungle, dragging him through mud and gunfire after an ambush. Samuel never forgot. and he sure as hell wasn't going to let his best friend's memory be dragged through the mud by a man who hadn't even shown up to the funeral. Samuel started at the courthouse, where he requested access to public records. The clerk rolled her eyes, but after some paperwork and a little sweet talk, she handed over what he needed: a copy of the original will from 5 years ago, and a revised draft Leonard had tried to file 2 weeks before his death, listing Amara as the sole beneficiary. It hadn't been finalized. That was the crack the prosecution was using to discredit her. But it was enough for Samuel to keep digging. Next stop, Leonard's estate. The police had sealed off the main house, but the guest house was untouched. Samuel slipped in through the back, past the wild rose bushes Amara used to trim. The place was dusty, silent, but full of clues. Samuel headed straight for the medicine cabinet. He opened every bottle, checked the labels, then did something simple but powerful. He compared expiration dates and dosages to Leonard's known prescriptions. Something didn't match. Several pills had been swapped. Bottles with Amara's handwriting had capsules with a different manufacturer's stamp. One label looked like it had been reprinted entirely. Sloppy, Samuel muttered. Amateur work. He took pictures with an old burner phone. Then, in the back of the drawer, he found it, a small, black thumb drive taped under the sink. He pocketed it without a word. Back in jail, Amara sat in a visitation booth, her eyes hollow, her voice low. "I don't think I can do this," she told Samuel through the glass. He leaned in. "Listen to me, kid. I fought in wars. I've seen people lie, steal, and kill for money. But you stayed beside Leonard when nobody else would. That tells me everything I need to know." Amara blinked away tears. "Then why doesn't anyone believe me?" Samuel smiled. "Because they haven't seen what I just found." 3 days later, court resumed. And this time, it was Samuel Harlan who took the stand. "I was Leonard Whitmore's closest friend for 50 years, he told the court, his voice gravel but steady. "And I don't care who shares his blood. That young woman sitting over there, she's the only person who gave a damn about him these past few years." He turned toward Terrence. But this guy, he was never around, never called, never cared. The prosecutor objected, but the judge let him continue. Samuel laid out clearly how Leonard had planned to change his will, how the guest house medicine cabinet was tampered with, how the medications didn't match what was prescribed. Then came the bombshell. "I found this," he said, holding up the thumb drive. Security footage from a forgotten kitchen camera in the main house. On screen, Terrence appeared in grainy black and white, snooping through cabinets, handling pill bottles, wearing gloves. He was caught red-handed. The courtroom erupted. Terrence's lawyer tried to dismiss it, but the judge ordered an immediate review. Within 24 hours, Terrence Brooks was arrested for premeditated murder and tampering with evidence. Amara? She was released. That night, Samuel drove her home. The house was quiet. Leonard's garden was overgrown, the porch dusty. Amara stepped out of the car and just stood there, staring at the front door. "I don't know what to do now," she whispered. Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You live." That's what Leonard would have wanted. The trial of Terrence Brooks began 3 weeks after his arrest, and by then, the public opinion had flipped like a coin tossed in a storm. At first, Amara had been painted as the scheming, gold-digging widow. But now, people were starting to see her differently. A young woman wronged, accused, and nearly condemned for a crime she didn't commit. The prosecution's case against Terrence was damning. They had the surveillance footage showing him in Leonard's private kitchen, gloved, calculated, methodical. They had expert testimony confirming the swap medications were altered in a way that could slowly cause cardiac failure without leaving obvious signs. And then came the financial motive. The will Leonard had drafted to name Amara, as his heir hadn't been filed in time, which meant, legally, the estate was up for contest. But the older version of the will, one dated back to 2018, named no one. Leonard had planned to give most of his fortune to charity until Amara came into his life. And Terrence knew it. Your Honor, the prosecutor said during closing arguments, this was a crime of greed. Terrence Brooks had no relationship with his father. He had no claim. And when he saw a teenage girl stepping into the role he thought was his, he decided to eliminate them both, Leonard first and Amara next. The defense scrambled, arguing that Terrence was just checking on his father's welfare and worried about undue influence. But the jury didn't buy it. After only 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts, second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and attempted fraud. Terrence was sentenced to 37 years in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, Amara sat quietly in the gallery. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and exhaled, as if letting go of a breath she'd been holding for months. But justice doesn't always bring peace. After the trial, Amara returned to Leonard's estate one last time. The garden was wild now, overrun with weeds. The mailbox had been replaced. The porch swing where they used to sit and sip sweet tea was creaky and worn. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a museum of ghosts. And the worst part? The will. Because Leonard's final version had not been officially filed, the estate entered probate limbo. The charities listed in the previous version began legal proceedings. The court ultimately ruled that Amara had no legal claim to Leonard's estate. No house, no savings, no inheritance, nothing. She walked away with the clothes she wore and a small velvet box that held Leonard's mother's emerald ring. That was all. Samuel Harlan tried to fight it. He hired lawyers, wrote letters to the state, but nothing could change the legal outcome. I'm sorry, kid, he said, handing her a bus ticket and a duffel bag. This town doesn't deserve you. Amara didn't respond. She just hugged him, tighter than she had ever hugged anyone. Then she boarded a bus headed west, toward a place no one knew her name. 6 months later, in a dusty town in New Mexico, Amara Jenkins started over. She found a job working at a community center for at-risk youth, teenagers who reminded her a little too much of herself. She taught art classes, helped organize food drives, kept her head down. People called her Miss J. They didn't know her story. She never told them. But in her small apartment, on a shelf above her bed, sat a single photo of her and Leonard on their wedding day. He was smiling, eyes crinkled. She was laughing, head tilted back in joy. It was real. It had always been real. And no amount of doubt, scandal, or courtroom drama could take that away from her. One spring morning, Amara stood alone on a rocky hill outside Santa Fe. In her hands, she held a small urn, the last of Leonard Whitmore. She opened it slowly. The wind picked up. I wish you could have seen this place, she whispered. It's quiet. It's safe. You like it here. She scattered his ashes into the wind. They floated like dust, like memory, like freedom. I never needed your money, she added softly. I just needed you. Somewhere in Louisiana, people still talk about the girl who married the oil tycoon. Some call her a con artist. Others call her a tragedy. But those who really paid attention, those who listened past the gossip, they know better. They know that in a world full of fake things, Amara and Leonard had found something real, even if it only lasted a season. The seasons changed quietly in New Mexico. Summers baked the ground dry. Winters whispered through canyon winds. Life moved slower out there, gentler, softer. And for the first time in years, Amara Jenkins didn't feel like she was running from anything. She'd found her rhythm. Mornings were spent guiding art workshops for teens on probation or in foster care. Kids who wore armor made of sarcasm and pain, just like she once did. Afternoons were spent cleaning the community center, filing grants, helping out in the kitchen when someone didn't show up for their shift. She didn't have much, but she had peace, and sometimes that was enough. At night, when the desert turned cold and the stars bloomed above her trailer like wildflowers, Amara would sit on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea. She'd listen to the cicadas, close her eyes, and remember Leonard's voice, warm, gruff, laughing at her first attempt at making cornbread. Some memories fade. His didn't. She didn't follow the news anymore. Didn't care what Baton Rouge thought. The last time she checked, Terrence Brooks had filed for an appeal claiming procedural error in the investigation. It was denied. He would die in prison, alone, exactly the way he feared his father would. But Amara didn't waste time on revenge. She'd already lost too many pieces of herself chasing justice. What mattered now was the living. The teens who sat across from her every day with tired eyes and broken trust. They didn't know her past, just her patience, just her smile, just her way of saying, "You matter," without needing to say the words out loud. One day, a 15-year-old girl named Destiny stayed after class. "You were married, right?" she asked, eyes squinting. "Some old rich dude or something?" Amara stiffened. "Where'd you hear that?" "Internet. I Googled you." Of course. Amara didn't answer at first, but then she leaned forward and said, "Yeah, I was married. His name was Leonard. He was 72, and he was the kindest man I ever met." Destiny blinked. Was it real? Or like a hustle? Amara smiled. Not bitter, not defensive, just sad. "It was real," she said, "and that's why it hurt so much when it ended." Destiny nodded, absorbing every word like it mattered. And then she said, "That's kind of beautiful, actually." A few months later, Samuel Harlan came to visit. He'd aged more in that year than any other, but his spirit was the same, gruff, funny, and loyal to the end. He brought with him an old shoebox filled with things Leonard had left behind. Letters, a hand-carved chess piece, and a small, folded note addressed to AJ. It was in Leonard's handwriting. Amara hesitated before opening it. "Amara, if you're reading this, then I'm probably gone. And that breaks my heart more than I can say. But I want you to know, I never felt more alive than when you walked into my life. They'll say all kinds of things. Let them. I know who you are. And if I had the chance to do it all again, I'd still choose you. Every time, don't let them take your light, sweetheart. You're worth more than they'll ever understand. Love always. L." Tears fell quietly down her face. Not the messy kind. The kind that come when a wound has finally stopped bleeding and just aches. She folded the note and tucked it inside her journal. In time, Amara became known not as that girl who married the old man, but as Miss Amara, the woman who fought for kids nobody else had time for. She opened a small nonprofit using donations from a few kind-hearted souls who heard her story and believed in second chances. She called it the Porch Light Foundation because when she was 17 and homeless, a man once left the porch light on for her, and that changed everything. On the 3rd anniversary of Leonard's death, Amara returned to that same hilltop outside Santa Fe. This time, she didn't bring ashes. She brought a plaque. It was small, modest, bolted to a stone with words engraved in steel. In memory of Leonard Whitmore. Love isn't measured by time. It's measured by truth. She stood in silence. No tears this time, just gratitude. He had given her more than a house, more than a ring, more than a last name. He had given her the right to believe she deserved to be loved. Fully, honestly. And because of that, she would never again settle for less. Some stories don't end with fireworks or courtrooms. Some end with a woman standing alone on a hill, strong, scarred, and still standing. And sometimes that's the most powerful ending of all.